Okay, first I have to start with this. So a few slides that yeah. So because I was not able to cover this. You remember that this one? Let me start with this. So why fairness is needed? Okay, so when you use non-determinism as an abstraction mechanism, sometimes what happens is that you would have abstracted something. This especially happens very commonly when you model concurrent systems, that you would have abstracted the scheduling part a little bit too much, wherein the wherein certain liveness properties, eventuality properties hold good only for a subset of the paths, those subset of realistic paths that you would normally expect a scheduler to enforce, okay, wherein it does not ignore a particular process infinitely often. And, so for example, here, these freedom from starvation, which requires that every process be given a chance to enter a critical section, happens only under the assumption that a process that can make progress is not ignored forever. Okay, and those are the fair paths. Okay, there are other paths which are not realistic, but they have appeared in this model because of certain unintended consequence of over approximation. Okay, abstraction. So those are things like where you continue to, although turn is 1, you keep scheduling process 0, which cannot make progress. Okay, so that is the case when you get stuck in this busy wait loop and turn is equal to 0. In those cases, process 1 never gets a chance to get to the critical section. So those kinds of so when you want to express, when you want to prove that such liveness properties, progress properties hold good only on a subset of these realistic or fair paths, then you'll have to first be able to define what fairness, what fair paths are, number 1. Number 2, then you will have to express a property that says that, express the property and then model check that, which effectively says that assuming that you restrict yourself to these so-called fair paths, then on those paths, things happen infinitely often, or certain events, liveness events eventually happen. So an instance of that kind of a property is what I had shown here. And this is what we had discussed, we had discussed this, and how you would, how you would support fairness as well as specify these kinds of properties that you want to check. Certain progress properties, liveness properties, only under the assumption that you are by restricting yourself to certain fair paths within your model. So that is the motivation for fairness. Okay, and now, okay, so how do we specify that? And there is an issue in doing that if you restrict yourself to CTL logic, and that's what I was trying to captured. First, let me address how you, in order to specify what fair paths are. Okay, so fairness is usually expressed as some events or those paths on which certain events occur infinitely often. Okay, and those events are usually expressed either directly or indirectly. The fact that the scheduler, which is abstracted, does not ignore a particular process indefinitely, and usually that can be expressed by yes, and by defining certain events, the desirable events that you want to happen. That you want to happen infinitely often. Okay, so the way it is done is by extending your cryptic structure, making it fair cryptic structure. In addition to the usual components, you have a set of predicates, okay, which actually define certain states, set of states. So each predicate defines a certain a subset of states, okay, and then you define fair paths as those in which any one of these conditions hold good infinitely often. So it is usually described as a conjunction of disjunctions, where you say, either one of these should occur infinitely often. Okay. So each of these will have to occur in each of these things have to, or some state, okay, or these conditions will have to hold good infinitely often. Then what you do is, assuming that, that these events, each of these events happen infinitely often, you restrict yourself to those parts in which each of these events will happen infinitely often. Under that condition, you prove the desired property. Okay, so what you, and these are usually GF of P like property, like have defined. Okay, either this events happen infinitely often, or this events, one of these events infinitely often, are a conjunction of certain events, one of those events happening infinitely often. They are expressed as a conjunction of GF property. So what you really want to prove is, can be expressed as an LTL property, because GF is an LTL property. So you want to express this as GF implies that something, some liveness property, okay, like GF, and with an A. Now that is not the same as, for example, in this, in this case, I'm clumsy. For example, this one, it is not, you can't express. Okay, so when, basically what I'm saying is, A of, suppose the phi that you want to prove is also a GF property. For example, it's a liveness. So on those paths in which certain events happen infinitely often, that is, F path is expressed as GF of some P implies GF of P. Okay, that's a classic LTL formula. Okay, that is not the same as saying AG of AF of P, because AG of AF of P is equivalent to GF of F of P, because it is not the same as proving AG of AF of P implies AG of AF of P. Okay, and that is because see, AG of AF of P, that's what I had explained in the email. I sent you. AG of AF of P implies some other AG of AF of Q is not the same as A of G of F of P implies G of F of Q. Okay. The reason is, see, a G of AF of P says, if for any state, if AG of AF of P is true, then for the same state, AG of AF of Q will be true. Okay. Now, AG of AF of P will be true of a state S only if, if every path originating from that state is a fair path. Okay. Now, if every path is a fair path, then these two will be equivalent. But if there is only a subset of the paths that are, that are fair, then these two will not be, equivalent, because this will be trivially false. Okay, the antecedent AG of A of P will be false. Okay, will not be true of any state in which only a subset of paths originating from that are fair, and therefore so a model checking AG of AF of P implies AG of AF of Q is not the same as a model checking A of GF of P implies a G of F of Q. As a matter of fact, this thing of G of F of P implies G of F of Q cannot be expressed as a CTL formula at all. Okay, why? At least do you understand my explanation as to why AG of AF of P implies AG of AF of Q is not the same as A of G of F of P implies G of F of Q. That's what I explained, Brian. I want to make sure that you understand that. Do you understand?
Sir, I actually didn't understand. You said that AG-AF of P implies phi. If every path originating from that state is not fair, it will not hold true. But doesn't P implies phi? Isn't P the fairness constraint?
Yeah. Okay. So let's just look at P as some events. Okay. What does AG of AF of P mean?
From every state, you can reach.
No, if it's true of a particular state. Okay. Yeah. So if it is true of a particular state, okay, AG of AF of P means that every path originating from that P should hold infinitely often from every path, correct?
Yes.
So let's suppose, like in this example, there is only a subset of the path that are fair. Then this antecedent will be vacuously false for any initial state.
Okay, P implies phi is not the formula.
Oh no, I'm sorry. No. That's why I keep saying, okay, AG of AF of P, that is antecedent. Consequent is AG of AF of Q. Okay, a Q is phi. Okay, because that's the way that you have to prove. Okay, so for example, in this, I do not have. I had everything, but now I have it in different files. I'm sorry. I end up taking so much time just manipulating these things. Yeah, so is this the one? Yeah, so here imagine phi is some liveness property like AG of AF of Q, okay? So antecedent is AG of AF of P implies AG of AF of Q, okay?
I got it, yeah.
No, for that matter, it doesn't matter. No, I don't mean AG of AF of P implies Q, no, okay? So phi could be something else, okay? And anything, as a matter of fact, okay? If you want to prove some other, say phi is a CTL formula, okay? Like something happens infinitely often. That's what fairness is usually an issue when you're trying to prove a liveness property, okay? So phi could be any property. I don't mean pi implies phi here, okay? So I mean the antecedent is AG of AF of P, okay? So, okay, with that explanation, is it clear why AG of AF of P, these two formulas are not equivalent?
Yes.
Why? Because if for any state, this will be vacuously true, okay? So whereas this is true of those states, okay? I mean those initial states in which phi is true only for those subset of paths. Whereas here, because this is a state formula implying a state formula, okay, of phi, which is AG of A of Q, what will happen is if only a subset of the paths originating from the state is thing, then the precondition will be vacuously true, okay? Vacuously false. I'm sorry. Therefore, this whole thing will be vacuously true. So it is not the same as checking this one, and you can see that the LTL formula which says AG of AF of P, because all fairness constraints are expressed this way, okay? That they are only those paths on which a certain events happen infinitely often, okay? Which is specified as G of F in LTL. Now, what is G of F? Suppose you had G of F of P implies G of F of Q. Okay, phi I'm interpreting as GF of Q. For example, okay, what is the what is A implies B? It is not A or B, correct? A implies B is not A or B, okay? When you take not A or B of this LTL formula that I point to in the cursor, what will happen if F path is GF of P, okay? What is negation of GF of P? Can anyone tell me? What is not of GF of P?
FG of not P?
Yeah, FG of not P, correct, okay? Now, we just in the last class proved that FG is not representable as a CTL formula, correct? So when you have this not of this becomes FG of P or GF of Q, okay? So that a subformula of that is not representable, okay, in CTL. That's why I mean this one, GF of P implies GF of Q is not representable is in CTL because it becomes not of FG or, FG of not P or GF of Q, okay? That is no longer in CTL. That's why AG of AF of P implies AG of AF of Q is not the same as G of F of P implies G of F of Q. As a matter of fact, that thing is not even representable in CTL. Therefore, proving certain properties, be they, in CTL model checking, that certain properties you want to prove only for a subset of fair paths where a fairness condition is always expressed as some set of events happens infinitely often is not expressible as CTL, and therefore you cannot do standard CTL model checking. This is very important for you to understand. That is what. Therefore, if you're restricting yourself to CTL model checking, and then you want to model check in the presence of some fairness constraints, okay? And as I keep repeating, fairness constraint is always expressed as some events has to happen infinitely often, like I motivated here. That cannot be expressed as a CTL formula by itself, and therefore you cannot use standard CTL model checking. Therefore, we will see that if you want to prove CTL properties, that is some Q where phi is a CTL property under fairness assumption, that combined thing, something implies that is not expressible as a CTL formula, and therefore it has to be handled in a special way, okay? And that we will see when we talk about CTL model checking, which is our next topic. When you talk about CTL model checking, we will first see CTL model checking by itself, and then CTL under fairness, because fairness has to be handled in a special way. And all this preamble is to motivate why you need fairness, how you specify fairness, and why the formula that you need to check, okay, model check, that you need to verify under a fairness constraint is not expressible in CTL. That is the purpose of this, okay? This preamble, and I hope you understand. Yeah. Any questions here? Do you understand now? Yeah. That is what I had described in the email, which I'm trying to describe right now. Yeah. Any questions? Hello?
I understood it. So.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So the important thing is AG of A of P implies AG of A of Q, model checking that it's not equivalent to AF. I mean, when you have, G of F of P implies G of F of Q. That is the crux of the issue. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing now is so here is where we are, okay? So I'm going to start with CTL model checking, okay? So we have done all these things, spent quite a bit of time here. So this is where we are, okay? So I'll be describing CTL model checking first, okay? And then get to LTL model checking later on. We will start with, see, in model checking, there are actually three, you could say three ways, two broad categories. Explicit model checking, I mean, where you, and which is called explicit state model checking, okay? There you actually work on the state transition graph, okay? The graphical representation of the state transition system directly on the graph, and you use graph traversal to actually check to do model checking. Okay. Now then there is symbolic model checking, where you represent the transition system like we saw as logical formulas, and then you manipulate your algorithms, manipulate logical formulas. That is symbolic model checking. Okay. Most of what we but for illustration, and then there is, of course, automata-based model checking, which reduces the problem into one of checking language inclusion. Okay. Now, that is a framework. That framework can be implemented either as symbolic model checking or explicit state model checking. So, but I will start by describing an algorithm for model checking CTL formulas, an explicit state algorithm, because that kind of gives you a flavor of what explicit state is, and also it is kind of gives you an intuition of what how you do CTL model checking. After that, we will be looking at symbolic model checking of CTL formula, where that will be expressed as computing fixed points over iterative transformations over symbolic formulas. Okay. And then we will do LTL model checking. So that is the plan of the plan of action. Okay. So let me start with this. Okay. CTL model checking. So this is the basic idea. CTL formulas are always like this. Okay, they are hierarchy of CTL operators, right? So as you've already seen, even when you want to understand, whether a particular CTL formula is true for a transfer system or not, there is a way that you can do. You can actually, each of them is each sub-formula here is a state formula. Therefore, one way to, the way you model check is you have to find the set of all states that satisfies the CTL formula, and then check if my initial states are included in this thing. So that is the general approach. Okay, so that we compute the set of states that satisfy an arbitrary CTL formula, and then check if S naught, that is the initial set of states, is included. This is just an implication when you're doing symbology. So that is the thing. So now, how do you check such thing? Now you could actually do it hierarchically. So you can compute S phi is computed recursively by computing the set of states that a subformula satisfies, and then then use that to compute the set of states satisfied by the subformula at the next level, and so on. So as you saw from the duality laws, so that is one. That is one. I mean, all CTL model checking, regardless, we usually uses this approach of hierarchical method. Okay. So every CTL property based on the duality laws, which can be expressed, because we could express all the A versions of the CTL operators in terms of the existential version. So as long as we have the negation, the usual logical connective R, along with EX, EU, it is, and EU and EG, the existential versions are good enough. Okay. Therefore, we will describe how formulas that have these in addition to negation operator. Obviously, in order to express the universal version, you need the negation operation in terms of this. So, to devise our algorithm. So we will be focusing on formulas that only include these CTL operators. Okay. So let's look at, first I'll give you an intuition using an example, and then give you the formal description. Okay. So let's look at this. Okay. First, I mean, at the leaf level, so given a transition system, so at the leaf level, you have atomic propositions, right? So you just label. So now I'm looking at the way that you do is you take the transition system, and you start labeling the states there that satisfy each of the sub-formulas, okay, in a CTL formula, okay? At the base level, you have atomic formula, okay? So if you have P or not P, then that is easy. So you can label all the states in your, okay, first I want to make sure. So this distinction that I made between explicit state model checking and symbolic model checking, I want you to understand. Did you understand that? You have any questions? What I'm going to be describing now is the explicit state version, which works on the transition system as a graph. If you did not understand that comment, you'll have to ask a question here. Do you understand that? Is it a yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, good. So you have first label every state, with the propositions. Okay. So here is an illustration of how you could then label those states which satisfy EX of P. What is EX of P? What are the states that satisfy? Given that you already know which state satisfies P and which state satisfy not of P, what are the states that satisfy EX of P? I've already marked it there, but tell me, one of you, how can you? So from the states, I won't wait for your answer, okay? So from the states that are labeled P, every state that has at least one successor to that P state satisfies EX of P, right? EX of P is true of those states from which there is a successor to a P state, okay? Therefore, in order to get the states in the transition graph that satisfies EX of P, what do you have to do? So you start from those states that are labeled as P, and then you can mark all the predecessors, okay, that have, so every predecessor of a P state, you can mark with an EX of P, correct? Therefore, here, since P is true here, P is true, since P is true in S1, EX of P is true here in S0, and since P is true in S2, EX of P is true here. And since there is since S2 is also a predecessor of S1, so EX of a P is true here as well in S2. Okay. Similarly, so note that, yeah. So similarly, you can do for EX of not of P also. So note that in S2, both EX of P and EX of not of P are true. Okay. So checking EX of P can be done by just looking at by inspecting all finite parts. Okay. Are you convinced, or are there any questions?
This is because the graph is finite, right?
Yeah, of course. Yes. I mean, I won't keep repeating. This entire course is only for finite transition systems. Okay. Of course, if it's an infinite transition system, if you can label all of them, well, yeah, it's finite transition systems. This labeling explicit state model checking, yeah, this is for finite state transition system. Yes, okay, yes. So I don't even want to get there. So let's assume that is finite state. I mean, I can make an argument. Hey, look, if you're somehow able to label all of them, then you can always say EX of P. I can also label EX of P in that, for all infinite states. But I don't want to get there. Okay. So let's, then we'll get into all kinds of, debate over there. So let's restrict ourselves to finite things. So for finite state transition systems, assuming that you can label all the states that satisfy a sub-formula CTL, that you've already labeled it, EX of F. For any F, for that matter, assuming you have labeled for F, you can label the graph with EX of F, okay? By looking at finite paths from the states that have already labeled, okay? Correct? Okay, yeah. I mean, you can make a side argument, EX of P is also, but so let's restrict ourselves to finite state systems. This is thing. So now, how do you do AX of P? This is just for illustration I'm doing. So this is not of EX of not of P. Okay, so you express it in terms of EX, and then you compute EX of not of P. How do you get the negation? Okay, how do you get negation? If you already know, if you've already labeled the thing, you just take the complement, right? If you've already labeled all the states which satisfy formula F, the negation of that is will be the label for all the states, okay, for all the other states in your finite state transition system that that are not labeled with F. Okay, so in this particular case, not of EX of not of P will be S naught and I'm sorry, it is S naught, S1, and S2 as well. Okay.
S2 has EX of not of P, right?
Yeah. Okay. So that's how you do the, So EU can also be done that way. So if EU is okay, let's suppose that you have, although I've illustrated here for EU true until P, even if you had Q until P, you first or some formula F1 until F2. So in this case, say, Q until P. So you first assume that all the states in your transition system have been labeled with F2 and say with F1. So if F1, F2, then what you do is you start from, okay, so this one E something until F1 until F2 is true of those states as long as there is a path from a state that satisfies F1 that leads to something with F2. Okay, so in this case, first you start with P. Okay, so EF of P is true of any state, any predecessor of a state with label P, in which, in this case, since the F1 is true, it is true for all any predecessor of P. But if there is an F1, any predecessor in which F1 itself is true, and you keep doing this. Okay, you keep on. Okay, and then you label that with so anything in which P is true, it is EF of EF of P is true. And then, so you label that P itself with EF of P, and then you repeat this. Okay, you take every predecessor that is labeled with EF of P, and then and then you label its predecessors in which F1 is true, and so on, and you keep repeating this, and since it's only finite number of states that you need to visit, this process will eventually terminate, okay, with some subset of the nodes in your graph having receiving label EF of P, okay, and that is the idea. Now, even if there is a loop in this thing, okay, like it is here, as long as you have, you keep track of whether you have visited a particular state, which would have, as long as you mark the states that you visited, then you won't. You won't end up, your procedure will still terminate, okay? So you'll have to be a little bit clever about it, because you have to check, you have to do a check if you've actually visited that. If you visited a particular state, either it would have received the label EF of P, or it would not, it would have received. So in that case, you would still, so you might have to keep track of whether you're visited or not. So, with that thing, you could still, as long as your transition system is has only finitely many states, you can use this. That's because by inspecting a finite number of prefixes, paths leading to a P state, okay, and that's how you do it. So based on that, you have this labeling algorithm. By the way, this material that I'm using here, I'm pretty much faithfully following chapter 5. The chapter 5 has both the explicit state version, the symbolic version, as well as extension of CTL to fairness. Okay, so let me so this is the algorithm for checking formulas of this kind EU. Okay, and this algorithm works assuming that you've already recursively labeled your transition graph with the subformulas F1 and F2. Okay, so so that is the starting point. So you first accumulate all the states that have been labeled with F2. Okay, and for each of them, you will have to now start tracing back, okay, looking for its predecessor, okay, for every S state belonging to that set T. Okay, this is the base point, okay? So for every state that is labeled with F2, you add the label E of F1 until F2, because if F2 is true, the semantics of F1 of until F2, the state in which F2 is true, that also satisfies E F1 until F2, okay? Therefore, you add that label to every state in T, okay? That's your first step. After that, you start tracing backwards, okay, to enumerating all the predecessors recursively. So you pick one state inside T, remove that from T, and for every predecessor small t of the state S that you have chosen from T, capital T, you check, so you check you get the predecessor, you check if it is already has not received a label, because it is quite possible that you could keep getting the same predecessor state in your search of all the predecessors. Okay, so if that is not, if it's a new state that you have not seen, okay, then you add, and if F1 is, if that predecessor state has label F1, then you add a new label, F1 until F1 until F2, to that, to the predecessor, and you add that predecessor state to it, so that you can now compute recursively its predecessor, and you keep doing this until the T becomes empty. And you see, although you're removing a state at the beginning, you are adding a new state, its predecessor there, and for the reasons that I just now explained, because you can't, although you may visit the same state, either they would have, if you're visited, there would already be a label with this thing, and therefore this will terminate, because it's finite state, and also because of the reason that you won't be revisiting a label state. You won't be adding it unless it is state, if it's already labeled. Okay, so that's why even though in the predecessor path there might be a loop, you will not. This procedure will terminate. Okay, and that's how you will have to. That's what I meant when I said that in order to label all the states in your transition graph with this EF. I'm sorry. Yeah. EU of F. E. I'm sorry. This U should not be there. That's a typo. This should be just E of F1 until F2, then so this will terminate with all the states in which EF1 until F2 is true. Any questions here? Okay. Okay, so this explicit state, the processing of this thing, in the worst case, you may end up visiting every state, and you're also, tracing the edges also. So that's what I mean when the size of R, the number of edges, as well as S. Okay. And that is it's linear in that, in the sum of those things. Okay, the number of states in the graph and the number of edges. That's the most that you do. And since you're repeating this for every CTL operator in your formula, not only the CTL operator, it will also have some logical connectives like negation. So negation is just taking the complement, or is like taking the union. Okay, I mean of those those labels, and therefore you will. It's still in the quadratic in size. The formula. I mean, it is multiplicative in the size of the formula. Okay. Yeah, so it looks quite efficient, but notice that we talked about the state explosion problem. Given the number of state bits, for n state bits, the number of states, because it can be 2 to the n, and also if there are n parallel components, when you construct the interleaving, it is exponential in the number of components, and therefore the number of states themselves can be exponential in the number of state bits in your state. So this is still quite it can be expensive, but as in terms of the size of the graph, okay, CTL model checking is seemingly efficient, okay, because you can structure the computation in a hierarchical fashion. Okay, so any questions? Okay. Okay. Now, so what remains is to do for EG. Okay. Labeling algorithm for EG is a bit more complicated. Okay. Why? Because you have to see, EG is kind of the paths that are satisfying can be infinite. Okay, like you will have to check that every state in the path that is starting from that is originating from a state satisfies that, and that can be an infinite path. So you will have to even if you have the labels for, if you have EG of F, even if you start with the labeling of those states with F, you will have to look at, make sure that that you have to end up looking these, paths. Okay, although every path is kind of a lasso shaped, but still you will have to look at technically infinite, infinite paths, and therefore you just cannot start with labeling with F. So you will have to somehow check if you have been in a loop, okay, explicitly. So kind of loop checking will have to be done as part of the thing. So another way of stating it is you will have to inspect. Unlike EU and EX, it is not enough to complete the labeling by just looking at finite paths, predecessor, finite paths that lead into the label for the subformula. You will have to look at infinite paths to ensure that every state in that infinite path, you have, has the label of the subformula. Therefore, how do you do that? Is based on a few key observations about paths in a Kripke model. Okay, so any infinite path pi in M in a model can be expressed as some pi naught pi 1, where pi naught is a finite prefix of states in M, and pi 1 is an infinite suffix, and if that's such that S of pi 1 occurs in every state in that occurs infinitely often. So see, this is true for finite state transition systems only. Okay, if it's an infinite state transition system, this is not the case. Therefore, eventually there will be some pattern that have to repeat itself infinitely, and that is another way of saying that every state in that sequence pi 1, or another way of putting it, it is something like this. Okay, your path is something like this, pi naught pi 2. Okay, so a path, by the way, a state S can occur infinitely often if and only if it occurs in a graph it can occur, any state can occur infinitely often only if it occurs in a strongly connected component inside that graphical representation of the model. Recall that a strongly connected component is a subgraph in which every node in that subgraph is reachable from every other node, okay, in that graph. Okay, another way of stating what I just now stated is every infinite path can be represented in this fashion: pi naught followed by some finite thing, pi 2 to the power of omega, which means that pi 2 is repeated infinitely, where pi 2 is some kind of a cycle in them. With one of the the first state in pi 2 is part of a non-trivial maximal strongly connected component. Okay, or in general, pi 2 is a cycle formed. You can have a union of one or more non-trivial maximal SCC. I will explain what I mean. See, a non-trivial maximal SCC. An SCC is maximal if it is a strongly connected component and no subgraph of an SC, a strongly connected component C is maximal if no subgraph C prime of C is itself a strongly connected component. That's what maximal means. Non-trivial means that the SCC must have at least two states, or if it has only one state, then there has to be a self loop. Okay, so for example, in this graph, what are the two non-trivial maximal SCC? S1, S2, okay, this loop, and this self loop, okay? Therefore, the only infinite states, infinite paths in this are ones where the pi 1 can be S1, S2 omega, or S3 omega. So the non-trivial strong, maximal SCCs are only those two. Okay, let's suppose there was a self loop here in S2. Okay, I will get to what I mean by the footnote in a moment. Okay, but for now, I want to illustrate what maximal SC is. So if you have a self loop in S2 itself, then still the maximal things, there's this one and the self loop. They are two maximal things. But you can see that there is another SCC which is not maximal, which has two loops in it. Okay, S1, S2 with this loop and a self loop in S2. That's another non-maximal SCC. When you have that kind of a thing, your path structure, just as an aside, I'm saying, not every path is like this, but it can also be something like this, pi naught with pi 1, 1, etc., where this each of this is a maximal SCC, but they are interconnected. Okay, so so in that case, you can kind of arbitrarily, if you had a self loop in S2, say in this case, the only infinite paths is you after starting from S1, you either end up repeatedly being in this loop, or you go all the way to here and then you're repeatedly in that loop, in the loop at S3. Okay, but if you have a self loop here, then you can alternate, okay, arbitrarily between this cycle and the other cycle in S2, if there was one there. And so, strictly speaking, you can also have this kind of paths. But nonetheless, all of them will have to. So these things will end up in one of the, even if they're interconnected, even ending up in one of those maximal SCCs will take care of all the infinite paths that are of that have the pattern of this kind. Okay, the basic thing is that if you so in order to check EG, one way to do is you identify all the set of all non-trivial maximal strongly connected components in the graph. Okay, and then if every state in that, for example, if you ensure you start with that, so this is you make sure that your you label. I mean, if every you collect all those SCCs in which P is true in every state. Okay, so for example, here there is this strongly connected component in which P is true in every state, and then there is this strongly connected component in which P is not true. So you collect all the strongly connected, non-trivial, maximal, strongly connected components, every state of which satisfies the label F. We are trying to prove EG of P here. So assuming P is already labeled, you start with that, and then that path to the omega, that infinite path that you get, obviously satisfies EG. Every state in that satisfies EG of P, and after that, every state in every path that leads to a state inside such an SCC also to a state also satisfies things. So satisfies EG of P. Therefore, so you start with this SCC, you mark all the states inside that SCC with P, and then you enumerate the predecessors from every state in that strongly connected component and mark every predecessor leading to that recursively to that. So in this case, we start with this, and then the predecessor of there are two predecessors. S1 has only one predecessor, which is S0, and that satisfies P, and therefore you include that. Okay, so you label S0 also with EG of P. And do I have it? No, I don't have it. Okay, so and then there is a predecessor of S1, which is S2. Therefore, you label that with EG of P. I mean, that's already labeled with EG of P anyway, because every state, that is already a state in the SCC. Okay, so and that's those are the set of states. You can actually, once you label with P and you identify all the maximal, non-trivial, strongly connected components in which every state is labeled with P, and all the other strongly connected components in which violate that condition, in which there is even one state, if not every state is labeled with F, you remove that. Okay, you remove the strongly connected components, and then you keep and then you do this predecessor travel only on the pruned graph. Okay, and that's how you do.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
So what if there is an edge between S3 and S1, from S3 to S0? So the whole graph will become a strongly connected component, right? Because it forms a big cycle from S0.
No, but that's why I said it has to be maximal. Okay, so that's why I said if there is a loop back from here to here, then that won't be maximal. Okay, so the three maximals, there will be so that that won't be maximal SCC.
Sir, I think that's maximal because maximal SCC is defined as there is no other state such that you can add that to.
Okay, so here is the definition that is used. Okay, we have to double check. It's also used in the book. So if there is a subgraph of C, if there is a loopback here, now there is a subgraph of that, which itself is an SCC.
Okay.
That is the definition I'm using. Okay.
Okay. Okay, sir.
So C is said to be maximal if there is no subgraph of C prime of C such that C prime itself is a strongly connected component. Okay. So then in your case, what you have is there, this will be a separate maximal, that this one will be separate, and this itself will be another one. Okay. There'll be three maximal SCCs. Okay. In the example that you just now said, they are interconnected. Okay. That itself is an SCC. Okay. Therefore, that's why I showed this one. So you will have parts of this kind where you can arbitrarily loop in one of those maximal SCCs and switch between them. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So that's the definition of SCC I'm using. Okay.
How is the whole thing an SCC? Because SCC means that it should be bidirectional, right? That both states should be reachable.
No, he's saying if there is a loop back from S3 to S0,
Then it will form a cycle.
then there is a whole cycle that includes the entire graph.
Okay, okay.
That's also an SCC because every state in that is reachable from every other state. But all these, there are subgraphs of that which are themselves SCC, and that's why that doesn't qualify as a maximal SCC. Now, I mean, that's how the algorithm starts. Okay, it's enough to identify maximal SCCs. Okay, and then check if see if every state in that maximal SCC is labeled. Okay, is labeled with the sub formula. Okay, so and then you start. Now, that's why I had this footnote. If there can be SCCs that are not maximal, that can have, patterns where, you can have arbitrary number. You can pick one from pi one, once from this, once from that, an arbitrary number. There are also parts of that kind, okay? But it doesn't matter because you always have this non-deterministic choice between one of them. Okay, so as long as you have checked that each of the maximal SCCs, interconnected SCC that create such a situation, are all labeled. All the states in them are labeled with F. Okay, so it will also take care of these kinds of parts. Okay, so this is the basis for the algorithm for EG of F that I'll be showing in the next slide. What you do is, so it says that, yeah. So I mean, the algorithm informally, okay, is to maybe I'll show the algorithm and then come to this this lemma, okay? Yeah, no, maybe I'll describe. So what this says is, yeah, EG of F1 is satisfied by every state S in M, if and only if the following two conditions hold true. What you do is, from M, you construct a sub-transition graph, okay? A subgraph in which S prime R prime, in which you include all the states S prime that have, you remove from S, capital S, all the states that are labeled, that are not labeled with F1. That is, they are labeled with not of F1. Okay, you remove them. You keep only those states that are labeled with F1. Okay. And correspondingly, you remove all edges, okay, outgoing edges, you know, from that. Okay. Then it says that this satisfies only if there exists a path. That is, there exists, you know, there exists a state S in S prime that leads from S to some state T in a non-trivial maximal SCC. Non-trivial maximal strongly connected component C in the graph of M prime. So the first step is to prove it. And the thing that's because of the explanation that I've shown. See, if it is true of some state S, then it is true of every infinite path leading from S. And as I've just now explained, every path has to be of this pattern, has to have a finite prefix whose end and that leads and then ends up inside some maximal SCC. Okay. One of the maximal SCC, and that's why. So the proof for the implication this way is true because of the structure of those of the paths in a finite state transition system. Now, if these two conditions hold good, that is, if the state is the source state that leads to something which ends up, which an F labeled state, a label with F1 that leads in finitely many steps to something, to a strongly connected component. Obviously, every state on that infinite path that you get out of that is will be labeled with F1, and that's the proof. Okay, so given that, what you have is the procedure is this one. Okay, for checking, e.g., explicit state model checking procedure that operates on the graph structure of a finite state transition system, okay, is the following. The first step is the pruning step, okay, where you take this, so you keep only those states. We are assuming that your graph has already been labeled with those with F1 and not of F1. So you keep only those states that have been given labels F1. Okay. See, when you do that, that transition system, it's still a graph. It may not be a left total transition system. Remember that, but that's okay. Okay. Only some subset of the states may be left total. Okay. So but that's okay. Okay. Because what you're concerned is only infinite paths. If there exists some thing in that non-total graphical representation of a non-total transition system. Okay, so now after that you identify in that subgraph of your original label transition graph all non-trivial maximal SCC. Okay. Take the union of all the states occurring in each one of those maximal non-trivial maximal SCC in the graph G prime. Okay, and then you do this. You start by labeling. Yes. for every state in capital T, you label with EG of F1. Why? Anyone care to answer? Amin? Why is this sound to do? So what I'm basically doing here is every state that appears in, first of all, S prime has only, states that are labeled as F. Okay, notice that. Therefore, what I'm labeling is, so every state in the graph already has a label F1. But for everything inside this T, which is the union of all the states that occur in any of the SCC inside S prime, I'm also giving EG. Why is this sound to do? That's the question I'm asking. Amin? Just, I'm asking this to make sure that you're. Anybody else?
Sir,
One?
the strongly connected component.
Yes.
We choose that every state satisfies F1 because we are taking the subgraph F there.
Correct. Yes.
Which satisfies F1 in all the states.
Yes.
So a strongly connected component from that subgraph also satisfies F1 in a.
Yeah, but the key, yes.
And of course, there exists a path in the strongly connected component itself, which is a cycle.
Yeah, that's right. So the important thing is the cycle, okay? But because it forms a cycle, every state, infinite path originating from every state in a strongly connected component is something where that cycle that you have in here, okay, will repeat infinitely often, right? Infinite number of times. Therefore, so F1, every infinite path starting from each of that, every infinite path, okay, starting from that will satisfy, will satisfy F1, and therefore EG of it. Okay, so that's the reason. Okay, so so that's why you label everything, every state that occurs in any of the SCC as with F1. Okay, and then you start your predecessor chasing part, the loop. Okay, so then you choose a state inside T, remove that, and then for all predecessors small t of the state S, once again, if it is not labeled with EG of F1, then you add that label. Okay. And that's what we do. So this is to take care of those states that themselves are not part of the loop, but they have some finite path leading into a strongly connected component. Okay? And so once again, the same thing that because there are only finitely many states and there are finitely many predecessors, and since you don't keep labeling them repeatedly, you label them only if it is not already labeled, this procedure terminates. Okay. So once again, enumerating all non-trivial maximal SCC. This is important. You see, enumerating all SCCs is very hard, okay, in a graph. But non-trivial maximal SCC, that is the most important thing, and that is quite efficient, okay? And that's why identifying that is also of the same complexity as doing the predecessor travel that you need to do by this while loop, and that's why this thing is still efficient in the is polynomial in the size of the graph itself. But I keep stressing the state explosion problem is, and it's the p-spaceness of this thing comes because of two reasons, okay? One is this number of states itself can be exponential at the number of state bits. And to express certain property, the formula itself might be exponential in the number of connectives that you get, okay? So there are some things like that. And therefore, CTL, while looking at this kind of at the complexity based on the size of the graph and with the size of the formula, it looks quite efficient. You should not be misled that this is, when you express it in terms of the size of the states, okay, or some property, some LTL, some properties require exponential large number of connectives to do that. So those are two reasons why, if you express it in terms of the number of the states or the number of connectives in the formula, it can be exponential. Okay. So I will end by illustrating this thing. This is an example I picked from the book itself, but I know that it is late, but let's spend 5 minutes to go through this.
Sir, I wanted to ask one thing.
Yes.
Why did we need a separate procedure for EG? Because G can be expressed in terms of U, right?
No, not EG.
Separate procedure for F, because F can be expressed in terms of U as true until...
No. If you look at this thing, you see there is you need EG, okay, because you cannot have, go review my duality law and the operators in order to push.
Okay, I'll look at that again later.
Yeah, so you look at that, because what will happen is you will end up, to express it in terms of CTL operators, you will need EG, okay? I mean, you could see, okay,
I think G will be written as not F, right?
Yeah, because it will be written as, G will have to be, if you want to express it as thing, it will be written as not of, true until not of F1. So, but that's not a legal CTL formula, okay?
We only see the algorithm for U, not
because there is a negation on the thing. So if you want to do it, then it has to be, if you have to have AG, then you'll have to push that as a negation. You will need EG in order to keep the quantifier, okay, exists, the quantifier alongside the temporal operator without any negation, okay, you will need to have EG, okay?
But, okay, I just wanted to clarify this one thing. It's not an issue for us if we have a negation, right? Because we will calculate that of the negation and just take the complement of the set of states.
No. That is only of a, you can do that only for CTL formulas, okay? I mean, once you get the states, you can do it. But the moment you have E negation of U, then that is no longer negation of that. This is no longer a state. That is a paths. Okay.
Okay, I'll review it.
You see, no. This is the crux. I think. See, if you have E of negation of F1 until F2, if you just keep it like that, now in order to push that, okay, that is negative thing. Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't you review that?
I
If you
understood it correctly.
if you still have doubts, okay, go through that duality things. And I also had the slide on the universality of CTL operators. Okay, go through that once, and then we will. If you still have doubt, we will take it up in the next class. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Now this is well, I mean, kind of a trivialized microwave. So what it starts with a state, it's interacting with the environment. Okay. So there are some conditions. You start. You have to first close the door. Okay. Before you can start the microwave. Okay. So that's the kind of condition. So if you start, there are certain conditions in the proper operating of the thing. So initially everything, start is false, the door is open, it's not heating, and you're not in an error state. But if you try to start, before closing the door, you become, if you try to start before closing the door, you get into an error state. And then once you're in the error state, you are in the error state, and you're never able to heat it. Okay, unless you reset and then go back in this, and you can start the oven. Otherwise, you will have to close the door, and then you can start the oven, and then you go into a state in which you start heating, and then you can sleep with me, and then you can open the door at any point to come back into the thing. So. Yeah, so AG, okay, so in this one, if you are in a state in which you have started the microwave, properly started the microwave, okay? I mean, you started the microwave, then you will eventually, on every part, you will eventually reach, you get to heat it, okay? Is that true for this thing? If you're you start the, see, this is not true. I mean, I know it's towards the end of the class. So maybe I can start with this, since it's getting, what time did we, 50, I think it's, okay. So let's go through this slowly, okay? So, let me not rush. Since I'm having these 2 extra classes for BDD, I'm right on track. Okay, so let me, unless it's okay for you to, if you're still attentive and you can still go with another 10 minutes, then I'm willing to go. So it's up to you. Okay. What do you say?
I think we can end it.
Yeah, you prefer that we end it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I will upload it, review the slides, and then come back with questions. Okay, and we will do so next time. We will start extension to fairness and start discussing the symbolic, how to proceed with the symbolic version of this algorithm for CTL matching. Okay, good. No, okay, so we'll end it because it's getting late, and also there was